So guys, welcome to another edition of Deep Dive into Gaming. So I figure why not go ahead and do another deep dive into gaming right now in terms of what's been going on and stuff like that. So let's talk about Devil May Cry 5. So real quickly, I have to say that this is the one game that I was more or less excited for. Not over Kingdom Hearts 3 or Biomutant and stuff like that, but this is the one that I was like, I'm really glad that it happened type thing. You know, because really in all honesty, I didn't think we were going to get another Devil May Cry game after DMC Devil May Cry. But I'm glad we finally got another one, because this one was really good to see. Now, there are a few things that I want to go ahead and kind of brush over. Don't worry, there won't be any spoiler in terms of story, but rather it's more or less talking about the gameplay of Devil May Cry 5. So let's first talk about the three main characters. Obviously we'll go through them in order. We'll talk about Nero, we'll talk about V, and then we'll talk about Dante. So, Nero. Basically the same as I thought about. So, here's the thing. In Devil May Cry 4, you have your normal Nero playthrough where he's got the Devil Bringer, which is his arm, and that was basically the more or less of the advanced gameplay mechanic that they were trying to push for the Devil May Cry series. That, and they were trying to transfer Devil May Cry from where it was strictly Dante as being the main character, and they were trying to do like a master handing it down to the apprentice type thing, which would be Nero. And for a lot of people, they didn't like that, I guess. I personally loved it playing as Dante more, and the problem is that when you've got a character that's so virtually interchangeable and stuff like that, and so outrageously crazy, you don't want to switch out of that character. You always want to be that character. And while Nero is fun with the Devil Bringer and stuff like that, Dante brings a lot more action and just crazy stuff into the mix. And it's one of the reasons why we love playing as Dante. This is the same way. Although Nero does improve a lot in the game, it's not a major improvement compared to Devil May Cry 4. So we'll talk about that. Nero, admittedly, Nero's fun to play. He is fun to play, except for like one major flaw, and that's the main mechanic of Nero himself, and that's the Devil Breakers. Now, they're called Devil Breakers for a reason. They're meant to be used as a one-time tool, and then that's it. They break, and then you change into one of the other ones that you've got equipped. Which is interesting. They try to change it up to where he has like a ammunition on his devil arms, which are Devil Breakers. And he has a number of tools at his disposal. In the main game, you have like up to like, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll say 8. I think there's like 8 of them total, technically, in terms of the Devil Breakers. And some of them are fun to use, admittedly. I use a lot of the Gabriel. The Helter Skelter is really good to use. Ragtime is my personal favorite, obviously, because it kind of reminds me of Quicksilver from Devil May Cry 3, where you freeze time and stuff. And then, of course, the Rawhide is really fun to use. But the problem with those particular mechanics is that you have to charge it. Now, here's another problem with the charge feature. Unless you are able to dodge the enemy's attacks perfectly and not get hit, which I am terrible at, the Devil Breakers will break on charge. So in other words, as you're charging the attack to use said Devil Breakers special ability, it's going to break before you even get to use it, because immediately as the enemy attacks, and if you're not dodging it, it automatically blocks the attack, but then destroys the arm before you're able to use the ability. and it's one that I don't really like personally. I wish it would just more or less cancel out the ability rather than break it, but then that would defeat the purpose of calling it a Devil Breaker, I suppose you can say. Technically, it has an alternate charge, which is basically the, at the time, the L1 trigger, which is basically supposedly supposed to be your Devil Trigger. But since Nero's arm was ripped off, he no longer has the ability to use Devil Trigger. We'll talk about that in just a sec. It's basically your automatic Devil Breaker explosion pack instead. And what it does is that as soon as the enemy tries to attack you, this button command makes your arm explode and basically sends out a shockwave to push him back, technically. Supposedly it's supposed to do that. And that's good to have, but I get trigger happy really badly, and I end up using like 3 at the same time, like, and I'm like, well, there goes my half of my magazine for this. It's like, shit. But admittedly, the Devil Breaker is really fun to use, and if you're able to control your trigger fingers, like I'm terrible at, it's really interesting to try using. Although, I imagine if you could figure out the whole charging thing, I imagine you would have a lot more time using it. There are some Devil Breakers that I don't care much for using, but like I said, the previous mention, Gabrielle, Helter Skelter, Rawhide, and Ragtime are my favorite ones to use. They are absolutely my favorites to use in the game. And overall, Nero's not bad to play as. He's not really bad. Again, it kind of falls into that sense of like, it takes getting used to, but he no longer has the whole Devil Bringer mechanic where you can grab an enemy and use like a special command that you would do in Devil May Cry 4. Admittedly, Devil May Cry 4 Nero was better, but Devil May Cry 5 Nero with the Devil Breakers isn't a bad change of pace. It definitely changes the gameplay for a little bit of entertainment fun, I suppose you could say. Now, of course, Nero does have a Devil Bringer mechanic, but you don't get that until nearly the end of the story campaign of Devil May Cry. In other words, if you play through normal and you reach the final mission, he does unlock Devil Trigger. And that one gets triggered through the directional pad, the up directional pad, and that's an interesting mechanic, and it's actually pretty fun to use. But my thing is, I wish there was a way you could change in between Devil Breakers, because as far as I know, and some people may quote me in the comments, but as far as I know, I haven't really found a button command that allows you to change in between Devil Breakers. As far as I know, you're pretty much stuck with whatever one loads up for you. Even whenever you go around exploring the missions where it involves Nero, where you do find other Devil Breakers out in the field and stuff, you automatically have that particular one Devil Breaker equipped to you as soon as you pick it up. So it's like, I kind of wish you could change in between ones, because say like there's one that you want to save up for a boss and stuff like that. Like, for example, Tomboy, which basically increases your attack and firepower. And it's a really good one to have whenever you're fighting a boss, per se. If you can dodge the attack, of course. And it'd be nice if you could change in between other Devil Breakers to where you don't use up the real good one, to where you can save it for a strategy that you plan to use later on. Instead, it's more of a, hey, you've got it equipped with you, you gotta use it, one way or another. You're gonna use it. It's gonna break, but you're gonna use it. It's kind of sad, but hopefully, I sincerely doubt they'll fix that particular mechanic, but hopefully they might add a button prompt to where you could change in between. Again, I hadn't really found it yet, but if there is a button command, I would like to know what that was, because as far as I know, there isn't one. Now, that's the Nero side of things. Let's talk about V. V is a very interesting character, but is not a real engaged character, we'll say. He's more of a Virgil, we'll say. Virgil from Devil May Cry 3 and 4, where basically he has his normal sword throwing mechanics, which basically is supposed to be the gun mechanic. But basically what it is that V has his two demons, Shadow and Griffin, do the normal attacks. Griffin is basically your gun mechanic move, and Shadow is basically your sword mechanic move. Both of them are really good to play around with, and then of course when your Devil Trigger is charged up, you get to summon up Nightmare, which is basically this hulking Goliath thing, and basically he does the fighting on his own unless you implement Promotion, where you get to jump on his back and you control him for a short period of time. And I say short period of time because it depends on how quickly your depletion of the Devil Trigger goes in. Now, unlike the other two, V has a special mechanic that allows him to charge up the Devil Trigger a little bit quicker, where you prompt the R2 button and it prompts him to read the book that he carries with him. And basically it refills his Devil Trigger a lot more quicker. So unlike in previous entries, in this one, when he reads the book, not only does he charges up from normal attacks or receiving damage, the book also adds in for an extra way of attaining more of the Devil Trigger. Which is good because technically, you also use the Devil Trigger in order to charge up the attacks for both Griffin and Shadow. So you're going to be using the Devil Trigger a lot more often when it comes to V, especially when it comes to delivering attacks. And again, V isn't a bad character. He's an interesting character to say the least. It's a little too easy to pull off the triple S rankings with V. Unlike with Nero and Dante, it does take some getting used to, and unless you're a master at Devil May Cry, which I admit I'm not a master at, with V it's a little too easy to pull off the triple S ranking. I was able to pull it off on the first mission that I was playing as V. And normally I don't do that. I normally don't pull off a triple S rank on the first mission of the character. I normally pull it off like, say, like halfway through the game where I practically got all of the abilities for the character, and then I'm able to pull off some sick crazy moves and stuff like that. You know, like how Devil May Cry 4, Dante finally attained his last devil arm mechanic, which is Lucifer, and that's whenever you can pull off all sorts of crazy kick-ass moves and make it more interesting and entertaining. V is easy to use, and it's a lot easier to pull off the triple S, so quite frankly, on the one hand, V isn't a bad character. He's an interesting character, and it's a nice way to kind of change the mechanics and the gameplay style. But I feel like V is a little too easy to play as. Too easy. He's one of the, hey, if you're careful, you won't have to worry about dying as often. Which I died a lot, I admit. I admit, I died a little too often in Devil May Cry 5, but to an extent, I'm not that good at games. Then again, I'm good at some games, but not a lot. But anyway, so that's V's character. Now let's talk about Dante, which... Can I just say one thing real quickly? Playing as Dante in Devil May Cry 5 is the funnest I think I've ever had in any Devil May Cry experience. And that says a lot. My favorite Devil May Cry game is Devil May Cry 3, and that's obviously because you play as Dante the entire time. He has better devil arms that he can use and stuff like that. There are a buttload of bosses that you can fight that are so much fun to play over and over and over again, and Virgil is just a treat to experience, really is. But Devil May Cry 5 offers a better experience when it comes to gameplay. Obviously, you don't play as Dante for very long. You play as him more or less halfway through the entire game, technically, because there are certain missions where you can play as between either Dante, V, or Nero. And for the most part, I always default to Dante, for obvious reasons. But when I first started playing as Dante, you automatically start off with two weapons. You have the Rebellion, which is its main mechanic sword, and then you have the Gauntlets, which I forgot the name of the demon that is the Gauntlets. Now, in the past entries of Devil May Cry, like Devil May Cry 3 and Devil May Cry 4, where you had the Gauntlets, like Beowulf and Gilgamesh, if I'm not mistaken, for Devil May Cry 4 case, the Gauntlets haven't always been my favorites. In fact, I would arguably say that they are my least favorite weapons to use out of the two games. In fact, if I had to pick my favorite from any Devil May Cry game, I would use Auden, I believe that's the name. The twin sword demons that you would get in Devil May Cry 3. That would be one weapon I would use. And then Cerberus is another one that's my personal favorite to use for Devil May Cry 3. And in Devil May Cry 4's case, I love Lucifer. Lucifer is such a treat to play. Just a fun game, just a fun weapon to use. It's so hilarious. And it just, it makes it so enjoyable. But the gauntlets have not been the favorite of the series. In fact, I always upgrade those last just because I don't really like them. But in Devil May Cry 5's case, I think they finally nailed down the mechanic for the gauntlets. I am very surprised as to how fun that one is. And normally I always default to using the Rebellion all the time. In this game's case, the gauntlets have been the funnest to use in this one. Now technically I'm only talking about the main two. We're fixing to talk about the additional weapons that you get later on in the game. But for the most part, I enjoy the gauntlets a lot more than I normally do. Because technically it has two phase modes. It has its cooldown phase mode, which is more of a quick punch attack and then jump and lunge attack mode, which isn't a bad combo. But once it starts to heat up, that's where things get interesting, because it does a continuous punch attack mode, and then if you use the Swordmaster button mechanic mode, he does a charge punch mode, and basically punches even harder and harder, and it stays on so long as you keep delivering punches, which I've done all the time in the gameplay. So long as you keep delivering attacks, it will continue to stay in heat mode, and you will continue to continuously attack for continuous amount of time. And it is so fun to play. I love that weapon. I do. I never thought I would love the gauntlets better than I do the Rebellion sword, but I do. I love it way better. I think I love it a little bit too much. And then of course, you have the second weapon that you get, which is that of the motorcycles. I forgot what it's technically called, but you get the motorcycle technically. And for a lot of people, they've seen screenshots of how the motorcycle works and stuff, but I'm going to tell you right now. It is so fun to use. I think I stayed Swordmaster more than I did with any other style, just because of the additional add-on button command for the style of Swordmaster. Because the motorcycle, obviously you have your normal dual wielding each motorcycle where you slash at the opponent and slash at the opponent. And you have either the quick slash or you have the charge slash, where if you hold down the triangle button, it does this move where it just basically more or less chainsaws against the enemy. And it is so nice to do, especially on armor enemies, because after a period of time where you do this mode, it breaks their armor, and it basically increases the style gauge like crazy, and it is so fun to use. And if that's not the case, you also have the button command for the Swordmaster, where you're basically on the motorcycle, and you dash right through the enemies and stuff, and it's so fun to do. Especially if you finally pull off a wheelie, and just like grind on top of them. Satisfying as all get at. Plus, who doesn't love just swinging the motorcycle like a frickin' Buster Sword in mid-air? That is like the most funnest I think I've ever done in any Devil May Cry game. That is just a treat to play. I mean, seriously, it is so fun. Admittedly, though, the hat that has been memeing around on Twitter, which I've seen for like the past week as I was playing Devil May Cry 5, isn't that fascinating. It's Dr. Faust. Which is basically that cowboy hat. Now, technically, it's supposed to, like, be used to thrown at an enemy and reduce their HP. And then if you charge it with the gunslinger mechanic, I believe, it performs a shield around you and stuff. Which is more or less like a Aeroga mechanic in Kingdom Hearts 3, where not only does it do damage to the enemy, but it also reduces the damage that you get in battle. And I really haven't used Dr. Faust in the game because I didn't really find it fascinating. Now, I do want to try using it a little bit more, but again, it wasn't really as fascinating as it was using the actual Sword Master mechanic, because Again, I like the Swordmaster. It's so much better to use, so much fun. But then, later on in the game, you actually get more swords for Dante. Now, here's the thing. The Rebellion technically breaks in Devil May Cry. Devil May Cry 5, rather. It breaks. So he starts to use Sword of Sparta for a while. But then later on, he attains a new sword known as Sword of Dante. And that's where things get interesting. So, technically there is a new mechanic for Dante. So, as he charges his Devil Trigger, he can charge up another bar, where it summons up his Son of Dante trigger mode, where he basically turns into this giant demon, and it is so badass just to see him using that mechanic. It is so cool to see. So, when you charge up the Devil Trigger, if it's somewhat charged up, you can use, I believe, if you just hold the L1 button, and it charges up the other trigger mode. It charges it up. And if it's fully charged, you have to let it charge a little bit longer, and when it's fully glowing, the sword stabs through Dante, and he changes into this giant devil lava creature, and basically it destroys everything. I kid you not when I say this. It destroys everything. So, now here's the problem with that one. It delivers high attack power, but it doesn't refill your HP bar. So unlike normal Devil Trigger, you're at risk of not gaining any health back. But it destroys the opponent like you would not believe. It is insane how much damage it does to any enemy, much less bosses. So, depending on your gameplay style, you will be using that rather than your Devil Trigger. So, but then again, in Dante's case, you will refill the Devil Trigger a lot quicker than you normally do. Especially if you use the motorcycle, because apparently when you do this charge attack mode where you're basically chainsawing the enemy and stuff, it basically fills up the Devil Trigger a little bit quicker than most attacks. Now technically you get one more weapon, and that's King Cerberus. This particular weapon is more or less a reminiscence of Cerberus from Devil May Cry 3, except a little bit differently. Because it's a 3 elemental weapon. It's a ice weapon, a lightning weapon, and a fire weapon. And as you basically use Swordmaster, it changes from a normal nunchuck weapon to a staff, and it's a fire attack. So it's a real unique change of pace for a Cerberus weapon, and it's a nice return just to see, and it's really fun to play. Again, playing as Dante is like the best out of this game. It is so fun to play. And I think whenever Bloody Palace finally gets unlocked on April 1st, I think a lot of people are going to be playing as Dante rather than Nero and V. No offense towards those two, they are interesting characters to play as, but Dante is so much fun to play as in flippin' Devil May Cry 5. It is a blast to play. Oh my gosh, it is so fun. Oh man. Now I want to talk about something interesting about Devil May Cry 5, and that's the story. Again, I'm not going to expose anything or spoil anything for those that haven't played it, but there was something complicated that was talked about up to the release of Devil May Cry 5. And that's the fact that I've been hearing rumors that the team was having trouble coming up with the story for Devil May Cry 5. Or rather, that was a problem they kept running into in the Devil May Cry series, was just coming up with a story for the Devil May Cry series. And that didn't make sense to me, because Devil May Cry, to me, has never been about story. It's always been about the gameplay, about how kick-ass, badass you can be in terms of using the style of the game itself. And it's always been about that. So why is it so hard to come up with a story for Devil May Cry, when in reality, it's fairly somewhat simpler than you think? I mean, for example, it doesn't have to be about the main story of Sparta. It doesn't have to involve Sparta, for that matter. You know, Dante is a devil hunter, which means he's going to be hunting other devils. And in Devil May Cry 2's case, it does brush off a little bit about Sparta, but not enough to where it overcompensates for other events and stuff like that. Like, because of how Devil May Cry works, I don't see why they don't have like a, hey, here's 2 or 3 missions involving one mission that Dante is in, and then as soon as you get done with that part, you move on to another section where it involves 2 or 3 missions with another mission that Dante has to involve himself into. Like, so far, every Devil May Cry game since Devil May Cry 3 has always been a 20 mission chapter type series, so I don't see what the problem is in the Devil May Cry series whenever Dante could just easily do a multi-part series in one game. I don't see what the problem is. It's just, like I said, Dante's a devil hunter, which means he should be able to hunt other devils and not be involved with the main part being that of his father. Or hell, do a prequel where you are playing as Sparta, you know? We've been hearing so much about him, yet we don't play as him, so why not just do something of that nature, you know? Again, there's so much potential that you can do to enhance the gameplay of Devil May Cry. They just don't think of it. They think of, okay, how can we expand the story of Devil May Cry? And technically they try to do a story lore for Devil May Cry 5, but it doesn't expand no more than just like the first like minute of something, and then it goes back into the main game and it's never like a major explanation. Again, it's never been the biggest picture for Devil May Cry. The gameplay has always been the bigger picture. Playing as Dante, being as badass, batshit crazy as you could possibly be in the game, that's always been the main core. And for some reason, the creators want to try to create a unique story that involves itself. And again, Devil May Cry 5, the story doesn't really outweigh itself in terms of the game. The game is still fun on its own, and you don't even have to worry about following the main story. You can just play through the main game and enjoy it either way. I don't see what the problem is. I really don't. And I'm hoping that after this, they just move on to something else rather than just talking about Sparta lineage and stuff like that. They can just move on to like other ideals. You know, like say for example, there's a cult looking to summon demons in order to use them as weapons, you know. Because technically, Dante, every single time he beats a demon, he attains a new weapon art in order to use and stuff. So why not make a cult who sees that ideal and tries to summon up demons in order to make weapons for themselves, but it fails because the demon, obviously, is being a demon, and therefore will kill the person who summons them. And so Dante has to go in there and stop them, and obviously after he beats them, he attains a new devil art. Why not do it that way? It makes more sense. Plus, it'd be a little bit fun to come up with all sorts of different weapons that Dante could create, you know? I mean, hell, Devil May Cry 3, 4, and even this one has done some really good weapon ideals. You know, you have the motorcycle, which is fun to use. You have the traditional gauntlets, obviously. You have Cerberus, you have Twin Swords, you have the freaking guitar out of Devil May Cry 3. I mean, come on, Ray. You have potential here. Why not go ahead and use it to your advantage, you know? We have yet to see Dante use a hammer. Why not do something with a hammer, okay? Again, you have so much potential that you could use out of this series. You just don't think it. You try to use the story, and I feel like the story hinders the gameplay experience. So instead of doing something involving the main story, let's take a break from the main story and come up with side plots that are more or less filler, but make a unique gameplay experience, you know? Like I said, Devil May Cry for me has never been about the story, it's always been about the gameplay experience ever since Devil May Cry 3. That's just my thinking anyway. But again, Devil May Cry 5, absolutely a fun game to play, especially once you finally unlock Dante. I'm going to tell you right now, you're going to be playing as Dante a lot. Again, V and Nero are fun to play to some degree, but Dante's a blast. Always has been, always will be. But yeah, overall, if I had to rate Devil May Cry 5, it's a 9. It is a 9 in my personal opinion, you know. Probably an 8.5, but I love action games like Devil May Cry and everything like that. And so to see Devil May Cry being back to his normal roots, seeing traditional Dante, seeing him as badass as he could possibly be, and having a freaking blast playing through as Dante, absolutely fun. So I would give it a 9. So that's my overall opinion towards Devil May Cry. So Anyway though guys, thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you thought about Devil May Cry 5. And until then, I'll see you in the next video.